May the words that are heard be thine and not mine. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Looking out at the road rushing under my wheels, looking back at the years gone by like so many summer fields. In 65, I was 17 and running up 1 to 1. I don't know where I'm running now. I'm just running on. Running on. Running on empty. Running on. Running behind. Running on. Running into the sun. But I'm running behind. In case you did not recognize them, those are the lyrics of Running on Empty by Jackson Browne. Famous in their own right, but etched in our pop cultural mindset by the epic movie Forrest Gump. You may recall the iconic scene with this song as its musical backdrop when Forrest is running alone into the sunset on some nowhere roadway with what appears to be no real destination in sight, but soon to run out of energy and motivation. Do you ever feel that way? You know, running, rushing about, hurry, with no end in sight, running on empty. The end of the day comes and all you have accomplished is an effort and an impossible things-to-do list with tomorrow's equivalent looming just beyond the alarm clock's way too early starting gun for the next sprint back into the rat race. Empty. Sounds familiar. There's really no wonder that Americans are some of the most frequently diagnosed with anxiety and stress conditions, this guy included. We just seem to be running on empty. Well, today's lections approach the subject of empty, unfulfilled living. Let's take a look. By this point in Job, our story's main character has reached rock bottom. Talk about empty. His undeserved, unfair, and perplexing suffering has forced him to the lowest point possible, or at least as my grandmother would have said, on this side of the dirt. Actually, Job probably would have preferred the other side of the dirt based on his misery. In Hebrews, our great high priest and king is described similarly as beaten down literally by his suffering, our provision of grace and our mediator broken and spilled out. Once again, the misery experience is due a divine and seemingly removed, detached God. Finally, in our gospel, we find another instance of the disciples fixated on their long-standing expectation of Messiah, only to find that he was something incarnately different. They just couldn't get it. James and John ask Jesus. In another gospel accounting, it's their helicopter mother who asks, by the way. They ask if they might sit at his right and left when he comes into his power. The question infers that Jesus would soon be crowned king, ruler in Jerusalem, and his reign would be worldwide. So these two ambitious sorts, opportunists, want to be his top advisors with all the position and fame and wealth and authority that come with it. Jesus assures them that they did not want to flank him when he came into his glory. Ironically, it would be two thieves crucified at his right and left that noonday at Golgotha. Well, James and John assure him that they did want to be at his side in keeping with their misunderstanding of his passion, even though by now he had attempted to convey it often. So he assures them that they would have their crosses to bear soon enough. Note, most of the disciples did eventually perceive their mission and faithfully held it. and many of them were brutally executed. Interestingly, though, rather than browbeating them and say, "Come on, guys, listen up," once again, he takes the opportunity to teach them via the method of allegory. He affirms what would have been obvious to them, that rulers of that day lord it over them, in his words. They aren't just. They deprive and they exploit because they can. Absolute authority. This is not the function of leadership in the kingdom that Jesus was establishing. If you want to be at his right hand, another note here, when Jesus was raised, he was raised up to be at the right hand of the Father. If you want to be at Christ's right hand, then your desire, your objective must be different than the secular model of advance, succeed, no matter who you have to step on the way up. This disposition is unnatural for us. It requires a change from within, something spiritual. The first must be last. It's servanthood leadership. Did you notice that in all three lections that suffering was the key component? Here the idea of necessary suffering recurs. Now let me say again, I do not believe that God sends suffering your way to test you or smack you into submission. Other denominations attest to this practice dogmatically as a key pillar in their theological constructs of guilt and fear. The impact of incarnational grace changes that entire narrative. We do not worship a cosmic puppeteer toying with us capriciously. However, when trials come, and they do come, due to the precarious and broken nature of our human existence, then God intentionally works through those misfortunes to aid us in our becoming. It's an entirely different lens through which you look at suffering. This spiritual concept is commonly described as kenosis, or the kenotic theory, as represented in Philippians, particularly chapter 2. Its root is keno, and keno is a Greek word that means to self-empty, also understood as to making oneself nothing. Remember, Elijah found God in the nothingness, the stillness? Interesting. Christ, who did not consider his demotion into humanness as something to be exploited, nonetheless lowered himself to be a man, Jesus, and then he poured himself out, emptied himself on the cross. This concept is mind-blowing. God became man to do what? But then, God raised Christ, not only restored his life, but lifted him up on high and is seated now next to God. Oh, James and John and the rest of us, you just don't get it. We do not attain such heights without great cost. We must be poured out entirely to the point where we are empty, nothing without God, so desirous of God that all else is stripped away, then we become. Many ascetics seek this becoming through self-denial and discipline and focus and isolation and meditation. Even so, it is difficult to achieve. We, especially in our Western, affluent, self-sufficient culture, we almost have to be taken down to the mat before our vision can be reaffixed and we see God. Now do you understand why in the next few verses in Mark that Bartimaeus will ask Jesus to regain his sight? Regain his sight? So what's the bottom line? How does this apply in Madison, Alabama in 2018? When we're concerned about the trash pandas. I think that it's fair to suggest that most everyone here present has experienced their fair share of difficult times and suffering. We all are members of this order of suffering. No one's immune. We, like Job, have found ourselves on the ash heap, or like Jesus, have been poured out till we're empty. It is at those points that we must refill. We regain our sight. Believe me, there will be many options on which you may focus or with which you may replenish your tanks. Guilt, anger, addictions, isolationism, materialism. The key is choosing the correct octane for your make and model. At the deepest point of our being, a place only reached via painful, sometimes forced emptying, often not by our choosing, we can be poured full again with abundance and peace and joy and hope and fulfillment. Grief has been described as like a jagged, sharp edge, and it cuts you deep down into your soul to a deeper extent that you've ever felt before. When the blade or the sharp edge is removed, eventually the wound heals. But it heals open. So that now you have the ability to feel other emotions at a greater level and a deeper level than you've ever felt before. I know for sure that due to my brother's death in a car accident in 2004 and the great depth of misery, suffering, and pain due to that the joy I felt when Lily was born was to a greater depth. Poured full after being forced empty. This is the real lesson of Job. Everybody talks about the patience of Job. Job wasn't actually a very patient guy. He complained the whole dadgum time. Wouldn't you? The same lesson the 12 and the rest of us had and have to learn, often the hard way. When you are emptied, you have to refill. And only one source provides the something that you crave so desperately. Otherwise, you're just running on empty. Amen.